Digital Foundry is sponsored by Backtrace, the leader in crash and error reporting for game developers. Click on the link in the video description and sign up for your free trial today.
New consoles generally means new requirements on PC as graphical quality and complexity increase and the bottom line for hardware gets pushed up. So in today's video, I will be taking a slightly belated look here into the GPU requirements to hit PlayStation 5-like settings on PC in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as well as detailing my usual optimized settings on PC for this game. So let's get right to it, and the game on console here is an interesting one. Another Ubisoft title, Watch Dogs Legion, turned many settings down to high and medium, and even lower than low to hit its 4K 30 target on console. Valhalla takes a different approach, being an open world game targeting 60 FPS. In the performance mode in that game targeting 60 on PlayStation 5, it spends most of its time between 1440p and 1728p in our pixel count measurements, with honestly a lot of cutscenes and battles just being a straight 1440p. This is then reconstructed semi-successfully using TAA upsampling up to 4K. On PC though, there's sadly not such a great dynamic resolution option to match that which we find on console. The dynamic resolution that is there is masked as anti-aliasing, which turns on dynamic res when set to adaptive. Basically, the anti-aliasing option in this game is just a fake name for image reconstruction. High is native resolution, medium is 0.92 axis resolution, and low is 0.85 axis resolution. And setting it to dynamic switches between these three values based upon your performance target. So when set to dynamic at 4K, for example, the internal resolution will only drop to its lowest of 1836p. This is a far cry from the 1440p lowest we see on PlayStation 5 and 1188p we see on Xbox Series X. So on PC, for some reason, Ubisoft has arbitrarily limited the dynamic resolution scaler for some reason. And this isn't too cool in my book. Since we cannot match this option on PC, the way we're going to do this video is I will judge performance by going to an area on the PlayStation 5 where resolution bottoms out to 1440p and the FPS drops below 60. At such a moment, we will know the GPU is limiting performance on PS5. For the ease of reproducibility, I have chosen the opening cutscene here, which drops at its lowest to 51 FPS while hitting 1440p at this exact moment as of patch 1.04. Now, given that level of performance, the settings that I did find here actually make a lot of sense. So let's start with the shadow settings. Looking at the near shadow resolution proved extremely useless, as filtering and other factors made nearly all the settings from medium and above look really similar. I can barely tell the difference between any of them, but looking at shadows further away into the distance gave away which value the PS5 is actually using. Faraway cascades for trees, for example, changed their sharpness and resolution between the settings, and here I could see that PlayStation 5 was using the ultra high option for shadows here. This setting actually only controls the resolution of shadows as far as I can tell, and has a modest performance scaling. Ultra to high to very high increases performance by 4%, high is then negligibly faster than very high, and medium is about 6% faster than ultra high, and low is no different than medium. Here I recommend very high for optimized settings. After this, the world detail setting was derived in a similar manner, basically looking at objects in the distance to see how far they render. When going from low to ultra high, and zooming into this image here, we can see how each level up from low adds more detail to this fence on this homestead here until the very high option where the entire fence becomes drawn in. At ultra high, an extra tree is added into the image on the right hand side of the frame, and the geometric complexity of the shoreline is increased. Going over to PS5, we can see that the entire fence is rendered in, yet the tree from ultra high is missing and the shoreline is also using the lower quality model. Therefore, PS5 is using the very high setting below ultra high here. Going from ultra high to low has a minimal impact on the GPU performance in the realm of 3%, for example, in this shot, and that performance difference can easily be lost in the randomness of the game's weather systems. Here I recommend ultra high for optimized settings on a good modern CPU. The The cloud setting in comparison is a lot less exact. When lining them up, there's almost no difference between ultra high and very high, yet performance increases by 22%. Below this, high reduces clarity a tiny bit and offers a 27% performance gain over ultra high. And the medium setting dramatically changes the way the clouds are shaded, with a 29% performance increase over ultra high. Given how similar high, very high, and ultra high look, I have a hard time telling what setting PlayStation 5 is using. I mean, I can reason that it's not going to be using the ultra high option because it's extremely expensive for looking basically the exact same. All options from high to ultra high and PlayStation 5 look like different variations on the same thing, just with slight differences due to time of day, I presume. So to give the PlayStation 5 the benefit of the doubt, I will use the middle very high setting in my equivalent settings. But just in case, I will also do a test at the end of this video with the high setting for clouds as well to see how that fares. For my optimized settings, I would actually recommend high clouds. Texture settings were simple to find. Just load up the same scene and look at the textures. PS5 is quite obviously using the high setting for environmental textures, as medium and low have dramatic impacts on image quality. Character textures were a bit more subtle to determine, but if you stop this scene here, for example, and look at the collar on Ivor's shirt, medium is missing a bit of cloth detail here, while high preserves that cloth detail. Add in PS5 into the mix and it's easy to see how it's using the high texture detail due to having this cloth detail here. Here I recommend high settings for both these texture settings, as at 1440p this game was requesting just a little above 6.5 gigabytes of VRAM on an RTX 2060 Super, so there's not much to worry about there. Just like textures, water was also easy to find out. While all the settings look generally the exact same at sea level, going underwater shows that going from high to medium eliminates the underwater volumetric light scattering and increases performance by 10%, with low looking nearly the same as medium with no performance difference really. PlayStation 5 here evidences volumetric light shafts in the exact same scene, so it is most closest to PC's high setting. The depth of field setting is unfortunately a big unknown. Looking at side-by-sides, I cannot even tell a difference between the high and low setting on PC. And I'm not even sure if this setting's working, as there is no performance difference here on an RTX 2070 Super at 1440p in the scene when it is quite obviously limited in performance on the GPU. So it doesn't matter really what I set here for the PlayStation 5 equivalent settings, but for optimized settings, I would recommend low here just in case there is a one-off difference in some scene out there to increase performance. Now this is where I get to the weird part of equivalent settings, as there are some that cannot match the PlayStation 5. For example, you have the clutter option, which increases the density and grouping of foliage in the game. On the lowest setting, you have no foliage essentially, and it goes all the way up to higher densities of grass, tufts, and bushes on the very high setting. Here, PlayStation 5, no joke, actually uses a setting above the very high setting on PC, where you can see the PlayStation 5 having added bits of foliage above the very high setting in this scene here. You can also see that same extra foliage on PlayStation 5 above the very high setting on PC in this snow scene here. Considering this is one of the few settings on PC without an ultra high option above very high, I imagine this is an oversight of development, and this idea of it being an oversight is further reinforced by the fact that it has such a low performance impact when changing this setting. I merely measured a 4% increase in performance between very high and low in this foliage intensive scene, even though these two screens look worlds apart. Another inconsistency between the PC settings and what's on PS5 happens with the cloth in the game, which no matter what on PlayStation 5 is always below 60 FPS in frame rate, so 30 FPS or even lower on PlayStation 5. At that same distance on PC at the highest settings, the cloth in the game moves at whatever your native frame rate is. So here it's a nice smooth 60 FPS, but 30 FPS and a bit jarring on the PlayStation 5. To get the same cloth behavior as PlayStation 5, you have to drop the environmental detail setting down to medium, which updates cloth every other frame at 60 FPS. Since we lack the granularity to change this option separately, we cannot exactly match PlayStation 5 settings here. The last difference comes in some alpha effects, which appear to be of a lower resolution on PlayStation 5. This is best seen here in this fire, where in comparison to PC, there's a larger chunky look to the alpha effects here, and extra edge aliasing not visible on the PC version and cannot be changed in the graphical options to my knowledge. And that's all the settings, with my optimized ones and the PlayStation 5 ones. And I think there's some interesting conclusions here. Firstly, I think the PC settings in this game are not too great actually, as a surprising amount of them offer very little performance scaling, and some, like depth of field, do nothing apparently, and dynamic resolution scaling is arbitrarily limited and lacks utility. Also, the game does not offer a great ability to tweak the quality of tessellation upward in a meaningful way, as even at the highest settings in game, the tessellated ground below your feet is deforming right in front of the camera, which turns a lot of the ground in this game into a boiling looking soup on all platforms. My second conclusion here from this analysis of settings is that the lower resolution and performance at times on PlayStation 5 makes a lot of sense, as the PlayStation 5 is using some of the highest settings available on PC, and even one higher in one case. So let us go back to that scene where PlayStation 5 drops down to 51 FPS at 1440p, and see how some PC GPUs fare at PS5 approximate settings. Now in Watch Dogs Legion, with its ray tracing, the RTX 2060 Super edged out the Xbox Series X and therefore the PlayStation 5. In this game though, we're looking at a purely rasterization and compute workload, and as a result the RTX 2060 Super at PS5 approximate settings with the cloud set to very high here, gets bushwhacked in the opening cinematic at 1440p. It spends most of its time below 60 FPS, and it is struggling in areas where the PS5 is at its lowest 1440p resolution but doing just fine to hit 60. In the pivotal moment when the PS5 hits 51 FPS, the RTX 2060 Super is hitting 41 FPS. So at that exact specific moment, it is just shy of being 20% slower than the PS5. Interestingly, if you look at the raw teraflops here, the PlayStation 5 at its highest GPU clock is 10.2 teraflops. And the RTX 2060 Super at its rated clock is 8.1 teraflops. So we're looking at a 20% slower theoretical performance. That lines up very neatly. If we add in other key NVIDIA offerings and look at that pivotal moment, we can see how the RTX 2070 Super, with very high clouds and approximate settings, is a bit less than 10% slower than the PlayStation 5 at that moment. The RTX 2080 Ti is performing a bit more than 21% better than the PlayStation 5 at that moment. So on the NVIDIA side of things, with these specific settings with very high clouds, the PS5 would be performing a bit like an RTX 2080 or so. The only other similar AMD GPU I have in this performance class is an RX 5700, which when you compare to the PS5 at this specific moment is a little bit more than 15% slower. Now, given the average performances we know from our GPU averaging ladder between the RTX 2060 Super and RX 5700, I can say quite well that this game is performing above average on AMD offerings here and below average on NVIDIA offerings, which is something to note in comparison to other games where we may see different results. As I mentioned earlier, I would do a test to see how much high clouds makes a difference here in this scene, just in case PlayStation 5 is actually using the high cloud setting. And here, using the RTX 2070 Super as the example card, I registered a 2 FPS increase at that pivotal moment, so around a 4% increase over its previous 46 FPS. So you should expect similar improvements across all the other GPUs that I showed off earlier, thus decreasing the PlayStation 5 advantage here over those GPUs, or increasing the advantage in the case of the RTX 2080 Ti. Going over to my optimized settings in the benchmark, it's possible to see how the optimized settings at 1440p on a mid-range RTX 2060 Super can increase performance by 12% on average, at least in the benchmark. So it's actually not that much in the end overall, even though individual scenes can of course show off greater advantages. Really, the biggest gain in performance that this game has is by adjusting resolution, which I can do by turning on the adaptive resolution setting, also known as anti-aliasing, targeting 60 FPS. With that on, optimized settings performance over Ultra goes up to around 28%. This is okay, but this adaptive resolution setting still isn't that great and will not guarantee 60 FPS at all, as it just doesn't work that way on PC, which is something I hope Ubisoft can remedy in a patch. Speaking of things to remedy, this PC game has a number of problems. The game always hitches, for example, when you have the hybrid control option set to on and have not touched the controller in a while. And it's a big stutter and it's pretty annoying and it happens rather often. Likewise, all the cutscene cameras on PC are stuttery just like they are on Xbox consoles, so it's another thing to fix. There's only really so much I can say here. It's not the greatest PC version to be honest, but we at least have now our second bit of data on how the PlayStation 5 GPU compares to PC ones. And if you did enjoy this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, then please consider hitting that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, support Digital Foundry on Patreon to get years worth of Digital Foundry content available in high quality for download. If you want to talk to me about this video, write a comment below or follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. As always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.
Don't lose players to game errors and crashes. Instability will happen throughout the game development cycle during playtesting, beta cycles, or after you've released. Backtrace was developed to automate the capture and analysis of crashes, hangs, and non-fatal errors across PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, PC, Mac, Stadia, and more. Our unique data platform allows you to index anything, integrate with Jira, Slack, Discord, and run analytic workloads to better prioritize and understand your game's stability. Many of the industry's AAA studios depend on Backtrace. You should too. Click on the link in the video description and sign up for your free trial today.